I'd like to show you how to build a teeter-totter. And the first thing you need to do is you need to choose a place to build it. And I chose the border between the United States and Mexico. Because for me, the border is a very interesting place. It's a place where language and food and the cultures of different people rub up against each other in beautiful and violent and sometimes ridiculous ways, like in this photograph here. And it's also a place of horror, and it's also a place of humor. Horror caused by racism, poverty, oppression, and humor as a way to overcome those obstacles. Now, the border is a place that's constantly in flux. And I want to tell you a little bit about why I consider myself a borderland citizen. I'm from a very special place that's surrounded by 6-kilometer tall mountains, and it straddles the border between the states of Colorado and the states of New Mexico. But up until 1845, this was the northernmost frontier of Mexico. Now, there's also the source of a river that starts there, and today it defines the boundary between the United States and Mexico. And up until 1845, this was all that was left in Mexico in what is now the United States. And just like today, there was a militarization of that border. Military forts that were constructed along the border that were made out of mud. These buildings were US buildings, United States buildings, that looked like buildings that were 1,000 years old that were built just on the other side. And what I find interesting about this world is that when these two worlds collide, many interesting things happen, like this 1,000-year-old house becomes a tourist attraction. And we remember these borders even if they've gone away. So, for example, in the state of Colorado in 1932, the governor created martial law. He declared martial law and sent troops to the border to keep people from the state of New Mexico from entering the state of Colorado. And if you heard just last week, our president said he was going to build a wall in Colorado. Maybe he forgot how far away Colorado is from the US-Mexico border. We decided to build a teeter-totter in this location, right on the border of the states of Texas, New Mexico, and Mexico. And this is a very interesting place. This is a place where there are 700 miles of wall constructed along that border. And this wall is designed to keep people out. In fact, the way they test it is they test it by taking a vehicle and loading it with 40 tons and smashing it into the wall at 50 miles an hour to show that this wall cannot be penetrated. But there's research going on the other side as well. Portable bridges that can just drive up to the border and allow vehicles to drive right over. Let me show you how that's possible. Sometimes this research works, and sometimes it doesn't. Now, since 1994, over 6,000 people have died trying to cross the border because the wall pushes people to further extremes in the desert. And you might think this wall is constructed right on the border between the United States and Mexico, but in fact, it's constructed several meters and sometimes several kilometers away from the border. But if you zoom in, you'll find something very special is happening at the border. People come together in beautiful ways, despite the wall's intention to keep people apart and away. Now, I've begun to collect these stories, and as an architect, I began to build models and drawings in the form of souvenirs to remember the time when we built a wall and what a crazy idea that was. I built snow globes and keychains and postcards and maps to remember the stories like this. The time a Border Patrol agent bought food from someone just on the other side. Food and money is exchanged to the wall, something that seems entirely normal, but becomes illegal by just a couple centimeters of steel. This is my souvenir to remember the time when we could share food and ideas across the wall. I call it the burrito wall. And if the border is a barrier to north and south movement, maybe all of that steel as an armature could facilitate east-west movement through cities. And in fact, it could become a pedestrian bicycle path that connects people within their cities in the green spaces. And when I imagined this binational library, I imagined a place where people can go and share books and information and knowledge, and the wall becomes nothing more than a bookshelf. Imagine a theater like this, because the border and the wall is a theater, it's a spectacle, and we should invite audiences to the theaters, where audiences can sit on both sides and performers as well. Or a swing that you would enter and go to the other side of another country until gravity deports you back. The game of volleyball has been played since 1970 along the US-Mexico border to bring people together, with players on both sides just thinking about each other and negotiating this line in the sand. It's been played since 1970, and it continues to be played today. You can see that they sell beer on both sides. And this is to remember the people who play volleyball along the border. Maybe it makes more sense to construct xylophones along the US-Mexico border instead of walls. My friend Glenn Wayant thinks that's the case, and he's been playing the border for years. He attaches microphones to the wall and plays them like a string instrument, or sometimes he picks up sticks and bangs them. He calls these weapons of mass percussion, to think about the weapons of mass destruction that perpetuated the construction of the wall in the first place. This is my souvenir for Glenn. On one side of the wall, it might look like this. Someone is mowing their lawn in their backyard. And on the other side of the wall, it looks like this. The wall becomes the fourth wall of someone's house. So I drew a set of blueprints showing the average size of a house in El Paso and an average size of a house in Juarez, Mexico. And you can see the wall cuts through the kitchen table. Here you see the wall cuts through the living room. And here the bedroom. Because the wall not only divides countries, it divides cities, neighborhoods, and it divides families. So in order to choose a site, we need a site where there are children. And if you're familiar with what's happening in the United States today, parents are being separated from their children at the border. And I wanted to do something about this, so I created a poster that we could download and use in protest. And if you're familiar with this sign was designed by an indigenous person in the United States who was working for the highway department to warn people that immigrants may be dropped off alongside the road, and that would warn oncoming motorists to be careful and be cautious. And so this is a subversive form of design activism. The silhouette of the father is of the civil rights leader Cesar Chavez, and he thought a young girl with pigtails would be someone that drivers empathize with the most. I wanted to call attention to child separation at the border, and I did one simple thing, which is to turn the family to face each other. This poster has been downloaded and used in protest, but I would have never imagined that I would have been allowed to return this sign back to the highway to be seen by hundreds of thousands of motorists in the form of an enormous billboard. So we chose a site where there are children, where you can see children playing and sometimes even climbing the border wall itself. Now we have to determine how much the teeter-totter is going to cost. Well, let's think about the wall first. $3.4 billion have been spent constructing the wall since 2006. And it will require $49 billion needed to construct and maintain the wall over the next 25 years. This isn't the wall that our president is talking about. In fact, his wall is intended to cost $70 billion. But let's think about that $49 billion price tag first. What else could that buy? It could buy 300 Seattle Public Libraries, or 500 miles of the High Line, or 350 Broad museums. Especially when no matter how high you build that wall, you'll probably find a ladder that's taller that only costs $300. The next thing we have to do is consider the details of design. When we first began to design the wall, we were imagining these scenarios where people could be lifted up over the top of the wall to look over. And we asked permission to build the teeter-totters along the border, and we continued to evolve our design, eventually deciding that this would be a very simple kind of teeter-totter, and families and children could enjoy. The teeter-totter itself could be slipped right through the wall itself. And we wanted to smuggle design into the border. So we see the wall, but if we look closely, we see a fulcrum that's attached right on the wall. And we began to test these ideas. And so this is the first ride of the teeter-totter. We painted the teeter-totters pink. Why? Because we wanted them to stand out from the wall. We wanted them to be fun. But in Juarez, Mexico, pink means something very important. The color pink is used to remember the women who were killed during the femicides in the 1990s. Because remember that the border is both a place of horror and of humor. And so now that we have the design and we've considered the details, it's time to ride the teeter-totter. So one day we woke up, and I want you to take a look and see what we did. I'll tell you that when we did this, I was scared to death. I did not know what was going to happen. But we brought families together, children together, and we transformed the border into a place of joy. And we transformed the border into a place where usually you only hear about the border being a place of violence, a place where bad men are selling drugs. But we showed the world that in fact it's a place where women and children live, and they have fun, and they take pictures of their kids with their cell phones. And communities could come together to share a moment of joy and celebration of their cross-national heritage. And even when the soldiers from Mexico showed up to ask, "What are we doing?" we said, "We're having an event with the children." And they stood back, and they smiled, and they took pictures. The Greek mathematician once said, "Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I can move the world." And for 40 minutes that day, we showed the world that play can be a form of activism, and that the actions that take place on one side have a consequence on the other. Thank you very much.